You are watching a VocalEye CrowderCast, a podcast-style conversation between four speakers over Zoom, hosted by VocalEye's Lindsay Adams, featuring Amy Amanti, VocalEye's Associate Director, Caleb Thomas from Ithaca Murals in Ithaca, New York, and Vancouver-based artist Emily Crew. Throughout the conversation, the speakers are featured in a four-square grid and are also highlighted individually in a full-frame view. Closed captioning is provided. Please enjoy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lindsay Adams. I do marketing and communications with VocalEye, and I am a white settler sighted person, and I use she, her pronouns.
My name is Amy Amanti. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as a white settler. I live with legal blindness. I'm also neurodivergent. I also live with chronic pain and chronic illness, so my intersection with the disability experience is many. I'm the associate director at VocalEye Descriptive Arts Society, and VocalEye is the first of its kind, a live descriptive arts society in Canada. And we are based in Vancouver, which is the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations.
My name's Caleb. I'm in Ithaca, New York, and raised male and white, and organized murals here in Ithaca as a justice organization, thinking about who we are and how we, our communities, and about justice in our communities and where we want to take our world.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Crew, and I work for VocalEye as just a contract worker. I do some of the post-production for video editing and some sound work. I'm also a professional artist, and I've done numerous public artwork, so I'm jumping in to talk about that a little bit. My pronouns are she, her, and I'll leave it at that.
So we've chosen a selection of murals in Ithaca by various artists, and are asking the crowd, which is all of you out there, to help us describe the murals. Two simple things: tell us what you see and how the mural makes you feel. And we are then sharing these descriptions in a number of ways with the blind and partially sighted community. And we're almost finished the project. We just have a few more days to go. So we just wanted to kind of have a casual conversation, just to open up the topic of public art and murals. Emily, do you want to sort of tell us what is public art? How do you define that?
Yeah, sure. Well, public art, if you're not too well versed in what public art is, you might immediately think monuments or memorials. And historically, this is how public art began, right? You see maybe a monument to a very important figure, or maybe propaganda statues, that kind of stuff. Then we begin to have sculptural works that are different than just some sort of sculptured dude. We have these public spaces where people want to express themselves and show then pride in their culture. And now in contemporary public art, we see artworks that can be very experimental. So we even see works that are ephemeral, right? We can think of public art to also be performance-based sometimes. And then we have time-based artworks. There's video public art too, or sound artworks that are in the public, where you can see speakers in an environment, and that work is public art, where we're just actually only listening. There's temporary public artworks that only exist for a short amount of time and then are deinstalled. And then also interactive public artworks that ask the public to physically engage with them to activate the artwork. So it isn't just a sculpture, like a bronze sculpture anymore, right? Or like a marble work or a fountain. Now it can be something that's very experimental. And then murals, of course, which is what we're talking about today. Murals are public works. And so public artworks are works of art that are accessible to the public, which is us. So it's not in the gallery space, it's not in the museum. And the public can also be not always outside. It could be in the mall, it could be in the subway station, but available for all of us, right? So murals are often on walls, and that word comes from, it's a Latin word, it just means art on the wall. Yeah. So that's sort of, yeah, the general gist of things. Now, when I mentioned guerrilla style too, you see this in murals a lot as well, because we see things like graffiti or tagging, things like that. So that's kind of an interesting topic of conversation too. Like, what can be considered artworks, public artworks? Where is the sort of line between, what is a mural? What are we really talking about here? But yeah. Anyways, that's a little intro.
Thank you, Emily. That's super interesting, even as an artist, just to hear that breakdown again. But you did mention one thing, and that is that public art is in, its ethos is accessible to the public. And so you use that word, which is kind of interesting. So public art is accessible to the public, but how accessible is it to all? And that's, I guess, a question for you, Amy. How do you take that on?
Yeah, I mean, when I go into a gallery space or a museum space, I inherently know that I'm going into a space where art is going to be displayed. And so I'm prepared. I know what environment I have brought myself into. When I'm walking around a neighborhood or heading into I don't know, a transit station or walking on the streets of my community, I often don't know that public art even exists. Because of the blindness, I walk right past it. Sometimes I walk into it, and that's how I know it. That's how I know it exists. But I often walk right past it, and I have no idea it's even there. Or I might catch maybe a glimpse of it with a partial and wonder, what are these strange colors? But I don't know overall what it is. And so, as somebody who doesn't have the privilege of sight, I feel like I get left out of this aspect of public art. And I want to know what's happening. I want to be a part of the conversation, because a lot of these things, as Emily points out, are statements, right? They're culturally related, they're movements, they're statements, they are politically engaged. There's lots of reasons why an artist might make a statement or a community might make a statement. And I want to be involved in that conversation. And so without folks pitching into something like the Crowder, I'm left out of that conversation. I don't even know it exists. I don't know that this is happening in the world around me. That's quite sad when I think about it. When I say it out loud, it's quite sad.
Yeah. And especially, I mean, with the murals in Ithaca that you're sort of organizing, Caleb, most of the murals, would you say, that you organize are related to social justice in some way, or these different types of movements that are going on? Is that correct?
Well, I would say I don't know. I'd have to really think about it, but I'd also say just the act of transforming a wall from being a blank wall to a work of art is political. Is that transformation, that hand touch, on the industrial, and to make it more welcoming, to make an environment more human-centric, more people, to bring the humanity in, as well as that engagement of artists and everyday people, getting to say what our community looks like, what our community entails, what our community, I think is a sense of, for people to feel like this is our home, a pride in our community. We center artists of color and working class folks and people with jail experience and people who care about justice and youth, and in terms of who does the artwork, and then also the themes of the artwork, and you've gotten to witness some of those through the Crowder over the last many weeks, of the different images.
And then touching back on sort of what Emily, you mentioned about these blurry lines and making statements, and how even with regards to the unfortunate circumstance of a mural or public artwork being vandalized or tagged on top of, or altering it in some way, can also be a whole other conversation that say the blind and partially sighted community would get excluded from, because if we don't know that the work is there and that it has then since been defaced, then there's this whole conversation whether having artwork out in the public, what would you say, Emily? Like, what is the meaning of public art? Is it meant to create a conversation like that?
In my opinion, whenever an artist finishes that artwork and puts it out there into the world, it is for everybody. And if it gets altered and it changes, this is just the nature of putting something out there, right? That is part of the story, I think. It's not always a nice thing if something is vandalized. Like, that's terrible. And it is to be expected. It actually happens all the time. Things get stolen too, all the time. And there are artists who find this to be really upsetting and really tragic. And I understand that, like, the feeling is not good, but it's part of it. You have to expect it. Artwork is going to be interacted with, right? People are going to climb on things. People are going to touch things. And I think you have to prepare for that. And that's kind of a really lovely part about public art, that someone can go up to even a mural and touch it. The sculptural works, you see skateboarders like doing tricks off of things. And there are some artists who are like, I don't like that, but I do. I think that's great. Like, that's fantastic. I think that's cool. But then there have been other circumstances with public artworks where the commissioners will alter them. And that is problematic. So there's like a very famous circumstance, and this went to court. This was in the 80s. But I remember studying it in art school because it was like a very important moment in copyright law, right? Where this artist, Michael Snow, had these geese, and they were installed in the Eaton Center in Toronto. There were like a bunch of geese, public artwork hanging in the Eaton Center from the ceiling, these sculptures. And it was like a flock of geese flying. And at Christmas time, the Eaton Center decided that they would tie these like cute little bows around the geese necks. And he did not like this because he felt that it altered the artwork. And so he sued them and won because it was an infringement on copyright. But I think it's different now when the public, being us, regular folks, then go out into the world and say, I'm going to tie a scarf around this, sculpture. That's something else.
But that's also like, when the public does it, it's somewhat anonymous because there's nobody to trace, right? To some extent. Yeah. But you're right, when it's a corporate entity, somebody who's commissioned the work, there's somebody who's accountable to point a finger at.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a question for you all, which is, how do you feel about the toppling of statues?
I'm a big fan when it's Confederate statues or racist figures, and that's and I think about that a lot. For me in this work, thinking about our cultural cityscape. And what I tell people about the beginning of Ithaca Murals and the beginning of me organizing murals was, when we started, there were just about 15 murals, and our cultural cityscape was more about our street names and our parks and plaques, and named for white men. And so how do we transform this, our cultural cityscape? And so I think in that same vein of taking down Confederate statues and white supremacist, Eurocentric, we still have a Washington Park, in honor of George Washington here in Ithaca, and it's nasty and it feels awful. And it's something I've got our mural map for Ithaca here, and I have that park's name is not on it. Murals is not the goal. Justice is the goal. In the same way, when we were working to change our main street in Ithaca to Martin Luther King Jr. Street, what we used to say is, what we're asking for is a street name change. what we want is economic and social justice. Murals at their worst can be tools for gentrifying neighborhoods, where murals can go on a building and the rents can go up and people can get pushed out of that neighborhood, displaced. And at best, murals and street art can be cultural, like acclaiming, a sense of home, that I'm here. And Amy, I'm curious for you about, the sense of that if you're not seeing the murals and you're not seeing the architecture necessarily, but there's a sense of feeling and a mood or something that happens when a place is more inclusive or is thoughtful. Amy, do you want to share about like a sense of space and inclusion? Do you feel like what, I don't know, anything on about that?
Thanks, Caleb, for the question. I mean, I would say that from an architectural perspective, so the shape of the exterior of the building is probably not something that I get specifically, maybe not even the interior. I mean, the kinds of things I get from the architectural spaces are like the sound experience, right? Like you can hear where the echoes are, so I can hear how tall the ceilings are or how vast the space is or how intimate the space is. If it's small and cozy, if the walls are lined with wood or soft materials, it has a sort of a quiet or sort of more intimate sound to it, as opposed to something that's concrete or has marble floors or that kind of thing. So I can sense those kinds of things in spaces. Largely, sometimes what I get from space in general, and this is mostly interior spaces, to be honest with you, is the types of furniture and textiles that are in spaces. And those are the things, it's less about an architectural design, because unless I'm tracing my hands across walls and stuff within a building or scaling the outside of a building, which, let's be honest, is probably not something that I'm going to be doing on a regular basis unless they have me on like the Amazing Race Canada and it's part of a challenge.
Yeah.
Oftentimes I will say that because I've done a lot of work with municipalities on making inclusive spaces. And so I've done a lot of like working with blueprints and talking about how we design spaces to be inclusive and whatnot. And oftentimes when you're at that level of design, it's all about the physical structure of the space and not about like, okay, well, we're going to have tables. Like, so they'll say, we'll have tables and chairs and blah, blah, blah. And I say, well, like, what kinds of tables and chairs? And they say, well, tables and chairs. And it's like, but what kinds? Like soft couches with armrests and pillows, or like hard benches, and what kind of benches with backrests, and like, right. So those are the kinds of details that somebody who is blind or partially sighted, and maybe other folks with disabilities like seniors, who may need armrests to get up and out of chairs, right? There are those kinds of features that for me make a space feel much more inviting. Those are kind of an afterthought. And even down to the colors, if you have some level of partial sight, some of those colors become much more impactful in either a harmful or an inclusive way, right? Whether it's if you have dark floors and dark furniture, that can be a scary place because you don't have the right kind of contrast to be able to navigate a space safely.
What would you say would be your most inclusive experience of a public artwork?
There is a piece outside of the Main Street SkyTrain station that's very tactile. It might be called the Watchmaker or something like that.
Yeah.
It is a bronze statue.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, and it's about this, I don't know, it's like a 6 foot tall man. So it's not so big that it's like a larger than life human figure. And he's got pocket watches, but he's got one for every minute of the day. So I don't know how many that is. It's one for every minute of the day, but they're all tactile. And it's like he opens his coat and he's got a whole bunch of them, and there's a suitcase on the ground and there's a whole bunch of them, and so there's and you can actually touch each one of them, and if you're careful, you can touch each pocket watch, and there's a one is 10:01, 10:02, 10:03, 10:04, 10:05, and there's one for each minute of the day. And so he's super tactile, and he's at a scale that you can touch everything on him And when I for years didn't know he was there, and I was actually walking with Steph Kirkland, who's the executive director and founder of VocalEye, and I was walking past with her one day, and we stopped. And she's like, "Have you ever seen this?" And I was like, "No, I didn't even know this was here." And we stopped, and she read the plaque about him, and she had known about him for years, and had told me the history about him, a little bit about the artist. I mean, this was years ago, so I don't remember all those details, but I was like, this is cool. I had no idea that this even existed. And that it really stuck for me that there was so much public art that I was missing. Um, that's a real visceral memory for me. And there are a lot of like examples of pieces like that. It's just that that one in particular has a real visceral memory because it was the first time that I had recognized that public art could be so impactful from a tactile experience.
I love that artwork. It's a fantastic artwork. And I think, you know, something that is missing from a lot of public art programs is having the didactic, the little information card, you know, available and more accessible, because some of them you can't even find them, or they don't exist, and they aren't accessible, right? You know, there, and I think it was you, Amy, maybe a long time ago, told me about these devices that are for people who are blind and partially sighted, that it's like maybe some sort of app that you can have on your phone.
There's a bunch of apps. There's a Be My Eyes. And so like I can connect with a volunteer, and they could be from anywhere in the world, and I point my camera and they can read something for me. Or there's a subscription one, right, where I pay, and it's just pretty much the same thing, but I subscribe, and somebody comes on, and I point my camera and they read stuff to me or whatever. So yeah, or there's a couple of them now that are using AI technology where you literally point your camera and it reads it. The tricky thing, of course, is lining up your camera with whatever you want it to read.
And knowing that it's there in the first place.
And knowing that it's there in the first place, right?
So for Caleb and Lindsay, you know, we've had this whole sort of discussion where we talk a little bit about, you know, works of art that are aesthetically interesting and or just meant to beautify an area. And then we're talking also about works of art that have that social justice aspect. And Amy had mentioned, you know, that she doesn't always get to have that experience of the work, and she misses out. She doesn't get that story. So when you are getting these Crowder submissions and people are saying, okay, this is what I see and this is what I feel, have there been some really interesting components that are coming through where people are saying, you know, this is what I feel, that come up?
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of going back to what Amy was saying about really getting the real essence of something. It's not just this is what the architecture looks like, or this is what the mural looks like. It's blue, it has clouds, and the clouds are on the lower left, and then there's bricks on the right, and then in the center it's a figure. It's like that doesn't really give you a mood. It doesn't give you the commentary. It doesn't give you the impact. So that's the main part. That's really the juicy part, is when you say, how does that mural make you feel? Well, you know, the use of yellow color in the mosaic sky of Feels Like Home, Spirit of Ithaca, it gives me a warm feeling. Like it makes me feel at home. I feel welcomed. It's the tone that is coming across through the colors and the composition. And if there's text involved, or if it's, you know, the presence of justice, it's more of like a one of the murals in the Crowder as well, Presence of Justice. It's more stark. It's like, you know, that's means business. It's like we're doing a power statement here, and that's the tone, like the use of purple with black and white. It's like, you know, really stark. So these types of comments about the feeling aspect, and of course there's such a range. Like a person can feel one way and then a slightly different way for another person. So combining all of those elements together, it's like this totally amazingly rich and layered understanding of the artwork, you know, that even as a sighted person reading some of these descriptions is like, wow, that's really cool that someone would interpret it that way, you know?
Thank you, Lindsay. I'm gonna, you know, I've described, I think, 4 out of the many of them so far. And now, like as I do them, over the next week, it's going to help me. That really helps ground it in, to understand that difference.
One of the things that I say to folks is, don't be afraid to be subjective. And and you don't have to be a trained describer to do this. And everybody's afraid that I don't know how to describe, right? And trained describers have been trained for years to be objective. Just tell me what you see. And I push back on that a little bit, because it's not enough to tell me what you see, because then I have to put a lot of puzzle pieces together. And there's a lot of symbolism in the sighted world that that means something, that are giving us information on kind of a subliminal level, and we interpret that in a way, right? Like we interpret that red might mean fear, for example, if it's put in the right context, or danger, or a hazard, or something like that. And so if somebody just uses red in a context, I might not, as a blind person, put that puzzle piece together with what is trying to be an interpretation. I come across audio description or description of something where it is just so objective, and I think that's nice. I'm sure it's accurate, but what the heck does that mean? And why am I responsible for trying to put together so many pieces that it makes this unenjoyable to connect with? I trust my describer. My describer has feelings. And the idea of the Crowder is that every describer brings with them all of the things in their life to that moment of description, right? All their baggage, all their experiences, everything they've collected in their life to the moment that they describe the mural, right? And everybody's going to describe it differently. Everybody's going to bring something different. And I can use all of those collections of experiences and go, oh yeah, you know what? I have experienced something like that before, and I can relate to bits and pieces of each of those things. So it's not so difficult for me to take all those pieces and go, yeah, maybe I could see that, but maybe I don't, and maybe I like that, and maybe I don't. It's kind of like sampling at a buffet and saying, I like this and I don't like that, or I resonate with this, but that doesn't work for me. It's not you telling me what I need to, what I'm feeling. It's me taking what you're experiencing and saying, yeah, that resonates or that doesn't. And it's okay if it doesn't, because I have my own experiences, right? So, my pushback is always, you're not telling me what to think. You're providing me your lens so that I can use my lens in order to enhance my experience of what the work is, and to join in the conversation. Because as human beings, if we want to have a conversation around artwork, that's what we would all be doing. We'd all be hanging around a piece of artwork and saying, I see this, I see that. Do you see this? Do you see that? This means this to me. That would be the conversation we'd be having. And that's what the Crowder does, right? It invites me into that conversation. So don't be afraid to be subjective, and don't be afraid to get it wrong, because I don't think there is any right or wrong.
No. And we have had certain, responses. It's like, I don't like this, or, like, I like it, I don't like it, I like this one better, or whatever. It's like, whatever goes. It's the way everyone sees things in their own unique way. We will be sharing all of the Crowder descriptions in a virtual event with the lovely Amy Amanti as host, as always. We're going to be sharing all of these descriptions. So these will be shared far and wide. And we're really excited about that. And there's still a few more days to participate. So join us.
I'm excited for wherever you go next, whatever city, whatever, in the world, or, and checking out the public art there and describing those. I'm grateful for this conversation. I'm grateful for putting my attention on this. It's a reminder for me to connect more with Finger Lakes Independence Center, which is an organization here in Ithaca, which is super thoughtful about people with varying abilities and disabilities.
That's the fun of the Crowder, is that there's no end to where you can go with this, to the types of things that you could describe, because there's public art everywhere. I'm excited to see where this could go. Sky's the limit.
Yeah, I agree. I'm excited too. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. That was great.
Thank you all.
Great to talk to you all today.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join the conversation and participate in VocalEye's crowdsourced description project. The Crowder is ongoing, and you can find previous descriptions of artworks as well as upcoming events on VocalEye's website, vocaleye.ca/crowd-source-description/, or on any of our social media channels such as Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Find us by searching VocalEye, all one word, or click the link on the bottom of our website, vocaleye.ca. Thank you.